To understand why my sister stood up at her own wedding and called me unwanted in front of 200 people, we have to go back to the beginning. My name is Morgan Ingram. I am 32 years old, and I learned very early on that in the Ingram household, there were two distinct types of daughters, the princess and the workhorse. We grew up in a sprawling 4-bedroom colonial house in Greenwich, Connecticut. From the outside, we looked like the perfect family, but inside, there was a divide so sharp it could cut glass. My sister Vivien was the princess. She was 4 years younger than me, blonde like our mother, and possessed the kind of effortless charm that made teachers forgive late assignments and made boys forget about every other girl in the room. From the moment she could walk, she was Daddy's little angel and Mommy's mini-me. I, on the other hand, was the workhorse. In my family, being the responsible one was just code for being the one who didn't need attention because I could handle the burden on my own. The favoritism wasn't subtle, it was mathematical. I will never forget the day we went shopping for Vivien's prom dress. My parents bought her a stunning, hand-beaded Sherry Hill gown in blush pink that cost $500. She looked beautiful, and my parents beamed at her with tears in their eyes. But I remembered my own prom, just 2 years earlier. When I had asked for a dress, my mother looked at me over her reading glasses and said, "Morgan, you don't need all that. You are the simple type. It suits you." I ended up wearing a dress from the clearance rack at Macy's that cost $63. I remember the exact price because I had to use my own babysitting money to buy it. Our bedrooms told the same story. Vivien had the corner suite with the balcony overlooking the garden, filled with white furniture and fairy lights like something out of a magazine. My room was at the dark end of the hall, right next to the noisy utility closet, furnished with scratched hand-me-downs from our grandmother's estate. I didn't hate Vivien for it back then. She was just a child benefiting from a system she didn't create. But late at night, lying in my dark room listening to the furnace hum, I used to wonder what I had done wrong. I wondered what fundamental flaw existed inside me that made my own parents look right through me, while they looked at her with stars in their eyes. I didn't know then that this pattern of invisibility would follow me for decades, all the way to the most humiliating moment of my life. I thought that leaving that house would break the cycle of invisibility, but I learned the hard way that we often accept the love we think we deserve. At 24, I married Kevin, a man who had a gift for making me feel small, questioning my choices, and criticizing my appearance in a voice that sounded hauntingly like my mother's. The marriage unraveled faster than I could have imagined. By the time I discovered he was sleeping with his regional manager, I was 7 months pregnant and had lost most of my sense of self. When I became a single mother to Ethan, working night shifts as a nurse just to keep the lights on, I foolishly hoped my family would finally step up. I didn't need money. I just needed a mother. But when I told them about the divorce, my mother didn't offer to help with the baby. She let out a long, disappointed sigh and said, "I always worried you didn't know how to keep a man happy." Vivien would never let this happen to her. My father said nothing. He never did. As for Vivien, she sent me a single text during the entire ordeal. "That sucks, but honestly, you always pick the wrong guys. Maybe try therapy." No offer to visit. No checking in on her nephew. To them, my pain wasn't a tragedy. It was just gossip. They used to highlight how perfect Vivien was, by comparison. Then, 2 years before the wedding, Daniel Mercer entered the picture. Vivien met him at a charity gala, and on paper, he was the perfect accessory for her. Handsome, successful, and a respected children's rights attorney. But Daniel was different. He had kind eyes and a habit of actually listening when people spoke. I'll never forget the first time he came to dinner. While my mother spent the entire meal redirecting every conversation back to Vivien's PR career, Daniel was the only one who noticed my son hiding behind my legs. He crouched down to Ethan's level and asked, "Hey buddy, I like your dinosaur shirt. Is that a T-Rex?" Ethan beamed. No one in my family ever paid him that kind of attention. Throughout dinner, I caught Daniel watching the family dynamics with a lawyer's observant eye, noting the way I automatically cleared the table while Vivien remained seated, checking her phone. Later that night, as I was loading my car, Daniel appeared beside me. "Does your family always treat you like that?" he asked quietly. I was so startled I almost dropped my keys. Like what? I asked. Like you're invisible, he replied. I forced a laugh and gave him the standard line I'd rehearsed for years. That's just how we are. Vivien's the star. I'm the supporting cast. Daniel didn't laugh. He just looked at me with an unreadable expression and said, "You're a good mother, Morgan. Ethan is lucky to have you." That was the first time I realized that perhaps the problem wasn't me and that Vivien's fiancé saw more than he was letting on. The wedding invitation arrived in a cream envelope with gold calligraphy so thick and expensive it felt more like a royal summons than a request for my presence. The venue was the Carlisle, a five-star hotel in Manhattan with a ballroom that had hosted senators and celebrities. It was a lavish affair with 200 guests and an estimated budget of $150,000 funded entirely by my parents. For context, when I got married, my parents contributed exactly $2,000 and complained about the expense for months afterward. But the invitation came with conditions. 2 weeks before the big day, Vivien called me. She didn't ask how I was. She got straight to business. "Morgan, I need to discuss some aesthetics," she said. "First, please wear something understated, pastels or neutrals only. I don't want anyone drawing attention away from the bridal party." I looked at the deep green dress I had been saving for the occasion, the one thing that made me feel confident, and quietly put it back in the closet. "Okay," I said. "I can do that." Then came the second condition. "Do you really have to bring Ethan?" she asked, her voice tight. "He's 5. He'll probably get fussy and ruin the ceremony." I explained that Kevin wasn't in the picture and I couldn't afford a weekend nanny. She sighed, a sound of pure annoyance. "Fine, but keep him quiet. We're putting you at a table in the back so you can take him out quickly if he makes a scene." On the morning of the wedding, my mother called to confirm the final humiliation. "I've spoken with the event coordinator," she said briskly. "You and the boy are at table 23, near the service entrance. Don't make a fuss about it. This is Vivien's day, and we can't have any distractions." Distractions. That is what my 5-year-old son was to them. I should have seen the setup then, the positioning, the isolation, the careful orchestration of my invisibility. But I just wanted to survive the day. I wore a forgettable dove gray cocktail dress I found on sale, exactly what Vivien had demanded. Ethan looked adorable in his little navy vest, clutching my hand as we walked into the overwhelming grandeur of the ballroom. "Mommy, it's so pretty," he whispered, his eyes wide. "It is, baby," I said, tightening my grip on his hand. "Let's find our table." Table 23 was exactly where my mother had promised, tucked in the far corner, half hidden behind a pillar, and so close to the kitchen's swinging doors that I could hear the catering staff shouting orders. The other guests at our table were distant cousins I had met maybe twice in my life. As I watched my parents make their grand entrance, hugging guests and basking in the compliments about their singular daughter, I realized that no one from my immediate family had even come over to say hello. We weren't guests at this wedding. We were an obligation they had tried to hide in the dark. The clinking of silverware against crystal silenced the room as the MC announced that the bride wanted to say a few words. Vivien rose from her seat, looking radiant in the glow of a dozen spotlights. She started with the usual pleasantries, thanking our parents for their love and support, playing the role of the grateful daughter perfectly. But then, her tone shifted. She said she wanted to talk about family lessons and the things she had learned from watching others. Her eyes swept across the ballroom and landed directly on me, tucked away in the shadows of table 23. "Morgan, could you stand up?" she asked, her voice amplified and bouncing off the chandeliers. "I want everyone to see you." My legs felt like concrete, but I stood up, gripping Ethan's hand. For a split second, I foolishly thought she might offer an olive branch. I was wrong. Vivien smiled, but it wasn't a smile of affection. It was a smile of anticipation. "My sister Morgan is a single mother," she announced, the words hanging sharp and deliberate in the air. "She is a cautionary tale of exactly what not to do with your life. Her husband left her because she couldn't handle it. And now, well, she is unwanted." She paused for effect, tilting her head with mock sympathy. "No man wants her. She has too much baggage. She is a warning, not an example." A wave of nervous laughter rippled through the crowd, emboldening her. She raised her champagne glass toward me as if proposing a toast. So, thank you, Morgan, for showing me exactly who I don't want to be. I stood there frozen, my face burning, unable to breathe or move. But the final blow didn't come from my sister. It came from the head table. My mother, the woman who had given birth to me, shouted out loud enough for the entire ballroom to hear. "She's a used product." The room erupted. 200 people were laughing. I looked at my father, hoping for even a flicker of defense, but he was covering his mouth to hide a smirk, his shoulders shaking with amusement. They weren't just mean, they were entertained. My humiliation was the highlight of their evening. I looked down at my son, and that's when my heart truly broke. The sound of 200 people laughing at your own humiliation is a sound you never forget. It wasn't a warm, shared laughter. It was jagged and cold. But the noise wasn't the worst part. The worst part was feeling the small hand inside mine suddenly tighten into a fist. I looked down at Ethan. My sweet, innocent 5-year-old boy, who loved dinosaurs and finger painting, was looking up at me with a face crumpled in absolute terror. He didn't understand what unwanted meant. He didn't know what a used product was. But children are intuitive. He understood the tone perfectly. He understood that his mother was being attacked, and that his grandmother, the woman who was supposed to bake him cookies, was the one leading the charge. "Mommy," he whispered, his voice cracking so loudly I feared it would carry over the applause. "I want to go. Why are they laughing at you?" I tried to answer him, to tell him it was just a bad joke, but my throat had closed up completely. I was frozen, pinned to my chair by the weight of their cruelty. I felt a tear slide down my cheek, and Ethan reached up with a trembling hand to wipe it away. His entire small body was shaking against my side, trying to make himself as small as possible in the darkness of our corner. That was the moment something inside me died. The last tiny flicker of hope that my family loved me was extinguished. They weren't just hurting me anymore. They were traumatizing my son for sport. But while the room roared with amusement, there was one person who wasn't laughing. From the corner of my tear-blurred vision, I saw movement at the head table. Daniel, the groom, had pushed his chair back. He wasn't looking at his radiant bride, who was still preening on stage, soaking up the applause for her roast. He was looking directly at us. Specifically, he was looking at Ethan. I saw Daniel's jaw tighten until a muscle feathered in his cheek. His eyes, usually so kind, had hardened into something dark and unrecognizable. He looked from my sobbing son to his laughing fiancée, and in that split second, I saw a decision form in his mind. It wasn't a decision made in anger. It was made in absolute moral clarity. He stood up. He didn't say a word to the best man or his parents. He simply buttoned his jacket and began to walk. He walked past the cake, past the champagne tower, and straight toward the stage. The heavy, rhythmic click of his dress shoes on the marble floor cut through the laughter like a knife. One by one, the guests stopped giggling. The air in the ballroom shifted from amusement to confusion, and then to a suffocating silence. Vivien's smile faltered as she saw him coming, but by then, it was already too late. The breaking point had been reached. The laughter didn't stop all at once. It died out slowly, replaced by a confused murmur as Daniel walked toward the stage. He didn't look at his radiant bride. His eyes were locked on our table, specifically on Ethan, who was still burying his face in my side, shaking with silent sobs. Daniel moved with the kind of cold, professional purpose I imagined he used in a courtroom. The string quartet lowered their bows, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. The silence in the Carlisle ballroom became heavy, suffocating. When he reached the stage, Vivien laughed nervously, her smile flickering. "Daniel, baby, what are you doing? I'm not finished." He didn't answer her. He simply reached out and took the microphone from her hand. He didn't snatch it in anger. He removed it firmly and calmly, the way a parent takes a dangerous object away from a toddler who doesn't understand the damage they are doing. "I apologize for the interruption," Daniel said, his voice steady and amplified clearly through the speakers. "But there is something I need to say." He turned to the room, scanning the faces of the guests who had just been laughing at my expense. Then he looked directly at my parents at the head table. "For 2 years, I have watched how this family treats Morgan. I've watched you ignore her, belittle her, and treat her like she is invisible. I stayed silent because I thought it wasn't my place. He took a breath, his composure cracking just enough to reveal the fury underneath. But tonight, you went too far. He pointed a finger toward our dark corner, where I was clutching my son. That little boy is 5 years old. 5. And you just made him watch 200 adults laugh at his mother because you think her pain is funny. Vivien grabbed his arm, whispering loudly enough for the microphone to pick up. Daniel, stop. You're embarrassing me. It was just a joke. He pulled away from her touch, creating a physical distance that felt like a canyon. A joke? He repeated, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. You called her unwanted. You called her a used product. I am a children's rights attorney. I have dedicated my entire career to protecting kids from toxic environments and from adults who should know better. I have spent my life fighting against exactly this kind of cruelty, and I will not stand here and become part of a family that inflicts it. Vivien stood frozen on stage, her perfect makeup suddenly looking garish under the harsh lights, her carefully crafted facade crumbling in real time. She tried to reach for Daniel again, whispering loudly enough for the microphone to catch every desperate syllable. Daniel, please. You are overreacting. It was just a joke. Daniel's laugh was hollow, a sound devoid of any humor. A joke? He repeated, stepping back to create a physical chasm between them. You planned this. You rehearsed this. You turned your own sister's pain into entertainment. He looked at her not with anger, but with absolute clarity. I can't marry you, Vivien. I won't. The collective gasp from 200 guests sucked the oxygen out of the room. In the silence that followed, Daniel delivered the final blow, one that would ensure this moment wasn't just a private family dispute, but a permanent stain on their reputation. And one more thing, Daniel said, his eyes finding a tripod set up at the edge of the dance floor. My cousin Mike has been live streaming this reception for my family members in California who couldn't attend. About 50 people just witnessed exactly what kind of family I almost married into. He set the microphone down on the stage with a soft thud. It was a sound of finality. He looked out at the stunned crowd, adjusted his jacket, and said, I apologize for the disruption to your evening. The bar is still open. Please, enjoy. Then, without looking back at the sobbing bride, he walked off the stage. The dam broke instantly. My mother was on her feet, her champagne Valentino gown swirling around her ankles as she stormed toward our table. Her face was twisted with rage, not at Vivien for her cruelty, and not at herself for enabling it, but at me. What did you do? She hissed, jabbing a manicured finger in my direction. What did you say to him? You poisoned him against her. Mom, I didn't say anything. I tried to speak, but her voice rose to a shriek. You couldn't stand to see her happy, could you? She screamed. You ruined your sister's wedding! I looked around the room. The guests who had been laughing at me minutes ago were now watching with suspicion, the narrative shifting in real time. In their eyes, encouraged by my mother's accusations, I was transforming from the victim into the jealous sister who had somehow orchestrated this disaster. I realized then that the truth didn't matter to them. They needed a villain, and I had always been the designated scapegoat. I walked out of the Carlisle with Ethan asleep on my shoulder, leaving the chaos behind me. The ride home was a blur of streetlights and silence. I expected to feel devastated, but mostly, I just felt numb. I got Ethan tucked into bed, and that's when the first crack in my isolation appeared. It wasn't a text from my parents apologizing. It was a message from my Aunt Linda, my mother's sister, who had watched the live stream. Her text was short, but it was the lifeline I didn't know I needed. Morgan, I watched the video. I am so sorry. I had no idea Patricia and Vivien were capable of something like this. Please know that you didn't do anything wrong. I read it 3 times. It was the first acknowledgement from anyone in my family that what happened wasn't my fault, that I wasn't crazy. But the real blow came the next morning at 8:47 a.m. My best friend Rachel sent me a frantic text. Don't read anything until you call me. Seriously. I have something you need to see. Rachel sent me 17 screenshots. They were from a group chat titled Ingram Family, No Morgan, a chat I had been removed from 6 months prior. As I scrolled through the images, the air left my lungs. The messages were dated 2 weeks before the wedding. There was Vivien, typing, "I've been working on my speech. I'm going to call her out in front of everyone. Make her see what a disappointment she is." Then my mother's reply, "Just don't go too far, sweetie. We don't want to seem cruel. Actually, you're right. She deserves it. She shows up with that kid like she's not ashamed of her life choices. Just make it funny. People love a good roast." And then, the one that hurt the most. My father. The man who I always thought was just passive. The man I thought was secretly on my side. Had written, "Just don't mention me in it." To which Vivien replied, "Trust me, she won't say anything back. She never does." I stared at the screen until the words blurred. This wasn't a spontaneous joke that went too far. It wasn't a slip of the tongue or wedding stress. It was a coordinated, premeditated attack. My mother had helped workshop the insults. My sister had scripted the humiliation, and my father had signed off on it, as long as his hands stayed clean. They had spent 2 weeks planning exactly how to break my heart in front of 200 people. I sat with those screenshots for a long time, watching Ethan sleep on the couch. For 32 years, I had bent myself into impossible shapes trying to earn a love that was never coming. But seeing that my father had signed off on my humiliation and my mother had scripted it changed everything. I didn't send an angry text. I didn't demand an apology. I simply opened my phone settings and did something I should have done years ago. I blocked them. My mother, my father, Vivien. I chose silence. They showed up 3 days later. I was just getting home from work, holding Ethan's hand, when I saw them standing on the steps of my apartment building. My mother was wearing her cashmere coat, my father in his golf attire, looking like they had taken a wrong turn into a neighborhood they deemed beneath them. "Morgan, we need to talk," my mother said, her voice like ice. Ethan's grip tightened on my hand. "Mommy, why is Grandma here?" I didn't let them answer. I turned to my neighbor, Mrs. Patterson, who had poked her head out. "Mrs. Patterson, could you take Ethan inside for some cookies? Just for 5 minutes?" Once he was safely behind a closed door, I turned to face my parents. "You blocked our numbers," my mother snapped, trembling with outrage. "After what you did to your sister. The venue is demanding full payment. The caterers won't refund a dime. Do you have any idea how much money you've cost this family?" I laughed. It was a sharp, bitter sound. "I cost you money? You called me a used product in front of my son. You terrified him." "It was a joke," she cried, throwing her hands up. "Vivien is devastated. Daniel won't return her calls. She needs her family, Morgan." "I am not her family," I said, my voice dangerously calm. "And neither are you." I saw the group chat. "Mom." I saw the texts where you told her to make it funny. I saw Dad tell her to keep his name out of it. It wasn't a mistake. It was a plan. My mother went pale. For the first time in my life, she had no comeback. She tried to pivot to guilt, the weapon she used best. "You're going to regret this. When I'm gone, you'll wish you'd been a better daughter." At that moment, Mrs. Patterson's door opened, and Ethan peeked out. My mother lunged toward him, arms outstretched. "Ethan, sweetheart, come give Grandma a hug." I stepped between them. I didn't shove her, but I blocked her path completely. "No." The word hung in the air, heavy and absolute. "He is my son," I said, looking her dead in the eye. "I decide who gets access to him, and I will not raise him in an environment where he learns that abuse is acceptable just because it comes from family." "Morgan, please," my father said, speaking for the first time. "Let's just—" "Goodbye, Dad." I took Ethan's hand, walked into my apartment, and closed the door. I locked the deadbolt, and as the metal clicked into place, I realized I wasn't locking them out. I was locking my peace in. It has now been 8 months since I locked that door. Strange how life rebuilds itself when you remove the people who kept tearing it down. The narrative my sister tried to sell to the world that I was a failure, a used product, couldn't have been more wrong. Last month, I was promoted to senior charge nurse in the ER. My supervisor told me I was the kind of leader people felt safe with. I also started dating again a pediatric nurse named Michael, who tells me I'm beautiful and actually means it. My family, of course, tried to creep back in. My mother sent money, which I quietly put into Ethan's college fund. My father even showed up at my workplace, looking lost, telling me that mom cries every day and that family shouldn't be apart. A year ago, that guilt trip would have crushed me. But this time, I looked at him and said, I spent 32 years waiting for you to love me in a way that didn't hurt. I can't wait anymore. The defining moment came last week. Ethan brought home a school assignment, a family tree. While other kids had drawn sprawling branches of aunts, uncles, and grandparents, Ethan had drawn just two figures, a tall woman with brown hair and a small boy holding her hand. That's our family, Mommy, he said proudly. Just us. I hung it on the fridge, right at eye level. That drawing taught me everything I needed to know. I want to leave you with this lesson. I grew up believing that family was everything, that blood ties were unbreakable, and that being a good daughter meant absorbing every insult. I was wrong. Family should be a safe place, not a performance where you are cast as the villain. Setting boundaries isn't selfish, it is an act of survival. It is recognizing that you do not owe your loyalty to people who do not respect you, not your mother, not your father, and certainly not a sister who views your pain as entertainment. For those of you wondering, Daniel did reach out. He sent Ethan a dinosaur encyclopedia for his birthday, no strings attached, just a kindness from a man who remembered a scared little boy. It was proof that good people exist, even if they don't share your last name. If you are watching this and feeling like the invisible child, or if you are holding on to a toxic relationship hoping they will finally see your worth, please listen to me. They won't. And that is not your failure to fix. Sometimes, the bravest thing you can do is walk away and draw your own family tree, even if it only has 2 branches. Thank you for listening to my story. If this resonated with you, or if you've ever had to choose your peace over your family, please like and subscribe. And tell me in the comments, what is the hardest boundary you've ever had to set? You are not alone.